Comrade Swami Gounden is a first-generation descendant of Indian indentured labourers shipped to the plantations of colonial Natal. His father, Karuppa, was the mahout on Nelly the elephant at the Mitchell Park Zoo. The family were later moved to the municipal workers' compound on Somsewu Road, Magazine Barracks. The squalid conditions there, intense overcrowding, hunger, disease, malnutrition, all of this forced Swami and his comrades to organize the people, to mobilize them, to politicize them against the creeping segregationist legislation that appeared to want to disadvantage the Indian community in particular. In spite of these conditions, deep friendships developed, friendships that endure to this day. Comrade Swami had a deep respect for workers, women workers in particular. He organized in various formations, sporting bodies, religious bodies, because it was in religious bodies that people gathered, and those could be platforms to politicize them and take them out onto the streets. On a recent visit there with cousin Balan Govender, he reminisced about the different categories of workers. The Durban Indian Municipal Employees Society, of which his brother R.K. Gounden was president for 25 years and a student at Sastry College. R.K. introduced him to the Communist Party in 1944. Later, the Natal Indian Congress, which was one of the key bodies mobilizing against the 1946 Ghetto Act, meeting in places like Red Square, calling out the community onto the streets, bringing out tens of thousands at Curry's Fountain. Meetings at Red Square were addressed by leaders from all kinds of different organizations, including J.B. Marks of the Mine Workers Union. Red Square is still a place of pilgrimage. They use propaganda tools, newspapers like The Guardian, The New Age, The Spark. For these acts of activism, many people were imprisoned, but they continued to defy. The Defiance Campaign of 1952, collecting demands through the trade unions, organizing with Moses Mabhida, Chief Luthuli, Dr. Monty Naicker, Alan Payton, and others. This was a broad spectrum of organization against repressive legislation that not only drew national attention to segregation in South Africa, but also international attention. When he returned to the site of the 1946 passive resistance, Comrade Swami paid tribute to people like Dr. Naicker, Dr. Kroma, and Dr. Dadu, people who built towards the non-racialism of the Kliptown Conference of 1955 that drew up the Freedom Charter. Comrade Swami was one of the Natal delegates as part of the NIC delegation to Kliptown. That conference famously declared that South Africa belonged to all who lived in it, and that all shall enjoy equal human rights. Repression followed. The Treason Trial of 1946 that imprisoned 156 of our leaders and eventually had the case collapse. Organization and mobilization continued in spite of that. Different ideological formations, from the Black consciousness movement to the trade unions, took up the resistance to apartheid. Students organized, workers organized. The leading lights of political organizations faced intense repression. After the launch of the UDF in 1983, to which Comrade Swami was an NIC delegate, they realized that you needed to up the ante against the apartheid state. They continued to organize in street marches, marching through our main centers to draw attention to apartheid oppression. After 1990, he continued his work with people like Comrades K. Munsami. He reflected on the activism in the trade unions with people like Comrade George Punnan. In latter day, Comrade Swami is eager to respond to the call of the organization for protests against everything from racism to joblessness, and to also constantly work with comrades in other formations, remembering his old comrades like Paul David, with whom he worked in the NIC, the Release Mandela Committee, and into the 1980s in the UDF. To this day, he joins marches of the African National Congress, goes to memorial services of comrades who have passed on. 90 years seems no impediment to somebody who's constantly at government functions, at rallies, paying tribute to old comrades like Billy Nair, younger comrades like Derek Naidu was on Robben Island, paying tribute to the recent passing of Comrade K. Munsami, with the likes of leaders like Comrade Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma. He remains active in the community, remembering his old comrades, sharing lessons of days past, and ensuring that young people especially get mobilized into our movement. Comrade Swami was recently honored by the Prime Minister of India when he visited South Africa. He's a prolific author, having put out several books on local communities, from The Point to Cater Manor to the Asherville community in which he lives. He remains an avowed communist, keeping relationships right across the political spectrum, working with the veterans' bodies to ensure that the history of the movement for social justice and liberation in South Africa is not forgotten, and that activism is relentless. He keeps up the propaganda angle, going on radio shows, working in formations like the magazine BARRACKS Remembrance Association, and recently at a vigil for Comrade Winnie Mandela. He's never forgotten the old comrades with whom he has worked. Recently, with Comrade Ahmed Kathrada and Phyllis Naidu, they looked on their years in the liberation movement. All of this brought him to the Order of Luthuli in silver, conferred by the President during the Freedom Day weekend. Comrade Swami at 90 is as active as ever, sprightly as ever, constantly keeping pace with policy developments within the movement, keeping pace with developments on the international level. Not forgetting the fact that it was something like 75 years ago that he first joined the Communist Party, then the Natal Indian Congress, and worked in the underground structures of the African National Congress. In spite of imprisonment in the 1960s, being listed as a communist for 25 years and theoretically being unable to be in movements of the people, he defied all of that. The recognition that he's now received is a fitting tribute to a life well lived, and the challenge that he constantly throws at us to remain mobilized and organized to create a better life for all South Africans. Halala, Comrade Swami.